September 19th, 2018, a Wednesday night. In Beverly Hills, a hotel manager stood in the middle of his lobby and told his pianist, "Black Sabbath is not played in this hotel's lobby." 40 people heard him and nobody objected. The only person who could have known why that sentence was strange was sitting in the farthest corner of the lobby, in a chair nobody was looking at. His name was Ozzy Osbourne. He was 69 years old, and this was not the first time he had heard that sentence. For 50 years, from different mouths and in different words, he had been hearing the same thing. The only difference was this. This time, somebody else paid for it. The hotel's general manager, Julian Reeve, was 44 years old, and he considered the sound of this lobby his own creation. The laminated repertoire list he had made for the pianist contained exactly 214 songs, and a brand consultant had chosen every one of them. He kept a decibel meter app on his phone, and he did not like it when the lobby went above 58. In staff meetings, he always said the same thing. In this lobby, music is not a service. It is decor. People don't come here to hear music. They come here not to hear it. But that week, Reeve had a problem nobody knew about. The hotel had changed hands 9 months earlier, and the brand auditor from the group that now owned it was staying there that very week. The man sat at one of the tables on the mezzanine, writing something in his notebook every few minutes. Reeve had been thinking about that notebook all evening. He had 2 children, and he needed to prove himself to his new bosses. Keep that detail in mind, because it explains half of what happened that night. The young man at the piano was named Miles Carter. He was born in Bakersfield, and he had come to Los Angeles 4 years earlier with 1 suitcase, 1 keyboard, and $2,000. He played 5 nights a week, from 7:30 until midnight, for $22 an hour. In the mornings, he washed dishes at a cafe on Fairfax. His mother had injured her back 2 years ago, and on the 5th of every month, Miles sent her $600. His own rent was $2,140, due on the 1st, and that night he had $312 in his bank account. But it wasn't the money that wore Miles down. He had been playing in that lobby for 3 years, and in those 3 years not one person had ever asked him for a song. Not once. People walked past the piano without looking at him. He was part of the furniture. But when the lobby emptied out at midnight, he would sometimes stay another 15 minutes and play something that wasn't on the list, the pieces he had written himself. That night, though, something was going to happen that hadn't happened in 3 years. Somebody was going to ask him for a song. In the farthest corner of the lobby, in one of the deep armchairs sitting in the shadow of a column, there was a 69-year-old man. A black hoodie, black trousers, worn boots, and those famous round glasses. Upstairs, in the private dining room, his wife Sharon was in a meeting. Around the table sat a tour promoter, an insurance man, and a lawyer, and on the table were doctor's reports. The subject was whether Ozzy Osbourne would be able to finish the rest of his farewell tour. Ozzy had sat at that table for 15 minutes, then said, "I'm going to get some air," and come downstairs. He hadn't gone down for the air. He couldn't sit in a room where people were talking about him. That year the word "last" had been attached to everything. The last tour, the last stage, the last city. For the first half hour he didn't even listen to the piano. It was like wallpaper, clean, measured, and completely quiet. Then something happened. In the middle of the piece he was playing, in the transition between 2 sections, the young man played 4 bars of something that wasn't on the list, something of his own, short enough that nobody would notice, quiet enough that nobody could complain. Not one of the 40 people in the lobby looked up. The man in the corner sat up in his chair. Miles didn't see him coming, because nobody ever walked toward the piano. When the man leaned against the edge of the lid, Miles looked up with his hand still on the keys. "Good evening," the man said. His voice was a little rough, and his accent didn't belong to Los Angeles. Then he asked, "Can I ask you for something?" Miles put on the automatic smile he had been wearing for years and said, "Of course, sir. If it's on our list, gladly." The man was quiet for a moment, looked at the polished lid of the piano, and then said, "Changes." And then, "But it's not on your list, is it?" Miles' fingers froze on the keys. "No, sir," he said. "I'm sorry. The hotel has a repertoire. And I—" The man raised his hand slightly to stop him. The hand was trembling faintly in the air. Then he picked up the laminated sheet from the top of the piano, turned it around, and ran his eyes down it. 214 songs, he said, and somebody else chose every one of them for you. He put the sheet back down but didn't take his hand off it. I wasn't on anybody's list for 40 years either, son. Let me ask you something. Since they put this piece of paper in your hands, how many people have asked you for anything that isn't on it? Miles couldn't answer. He looked over at the front desk. Reeve wasn't there. He was up on the mezzanine, beside the auditor's table. Then he looked at the keys, then back at the man's face, and in that moment he made a decision. In the years that followed, he would never once remember that decision with regret. The man nodded once and went back to his chair in the corner. When the first chord spread through the lobby, a conversation between two tables broke off halfway. The song was slow. It opened on the piano, and it had nothing to do with heavy metal. It was like a quiet elegy written about loss. The woman at the end of the bar set her glass down on the table and stayed like that. The elevator doors opened, but the man inside didn't step out. He listened until they closed again. The man in the corner had closed his eyes. He was remembering the big house they had rented in Bel Air in 1972. There was a dusty grand piano in the corner of the living room, and one afternoon, Tony Iommi sat down at it and found that melody, and Geezer wrote the words. Ozzy was 23 then, and he didn't really understand what he was singing. Now he did. As the second section of the song began, quick footsteps came down the mezzanine stairs. Julian Reeve was looking at his phone as he came, and the number on the screen read 63. When he reached the piano, he didn't say a word. He just laid his hand on the edge of the lid, and the young man stopped playing. The last chord hung on the marble walls for a second or two, and then the lobby dropped into silence. That song isn't on the list, Reeve said, keeping his voice controlled, just loud enough for 40 people to hear. What's it called? Miles was quiet for a moment, then said, Changes. Nothing moved on Reeve's face. He only asked, By who? And when Miles answered, the man in the corner heard it along with everyone else in the lobby. Black Sabbath. A muscle in Reeve's jaw tightened once. His eyes slid to the mezzanine for a second, to the auditor's notebook, and came back. Black Sabbath is not played in this hotel's lobby, Reeve said. He didn't shout. He said it very calmly, and that was exactly why it hurt more. I gave you a written warning in April. We talked about why we made this list. Then he added, Who asked for it? There was exactly one sentence Miles could have said, and the moment he said it, 40 people in that lobby would turn at once and look at the chair in the corner. Nobody, Miles said. I played it on my own. At that moment, the man in the corner had leaned forward and was about to stand. The young man's answer nailed him where he was, because the kid was lying, and he was lying for him. Reeve nodded, as if he had gotten the answer he expected. Then this ends here tonight. Collect your things. The rest of your wages will be in your account on Friday. Miles stood up and closed the piano lid slowly, with both hands, the way he had every night for 3 years. He took his bag from behind the front desk and walked toward the revolving door. Nobody said anything. 90 seconds later, the lobby was back to normal. Conversations picked up where they had left off. Ice knocked against glass. The elevator chimed. The laminated list of 214 songs was still sitting on the piano, and now there was nobody left to play it. The 69-year-old man in the corner chair was thinking about one thing. He had asked for the song was his, and that kid had lost his job because of him. Ozzy Osbourne set his glass down on the table and pushed himself up with one hand on the armrest. He had left a lot of things half-finished in his life. Tours, houses, promises. But he couldn't leave this one. When he started toward the revolving door, it was 5 minutes to 10, and nobody in that lobby knew yet that the real story was only just beginning. When Ozzy came out through the revolving door, he found Miles Carter 30 yards up the street, leaning against the pole of a bus stop. "Son," Ozzy called out. Miles turned and saw the man who had leaned on his piano 10 minutes earlier. Ozzy came 2 steps closer, then stopped. "I'm sorry," he said. "I asked for the song. I'm the reason you lost your job, and I sat there and watched it happen." Miles shook his head. "Don't apologize," he said. "Please." "There's something I don't understand," Ozzy said. "The man asked you who requested it. All you had to do was point at me." Miles was quiet for a moment, then shrugged. "Because it was obvious the man sitting in that chair wanted to be left alone." Ozzy's eyes narrowed behind the glasses, and his voice dropped a little further. "When did you work it out?" "Your voice," Miles said. "Not your face. When you leaned on the edge of the piano and said good evening. Then, on the worst night of his life, he smiled a little. I'm a musician, sir. I forget faces, but I don't forget voices. And it's fairly hard not to recognize a voice you've been listening to for 46 years. Then why did you play it? Ozzy asked. You knew it wasn't on the list. You'd had a warning in April. You knew you'd be fired. Miles looked across the street before he answered. I've been sitting at that piano for 3 years, and in 3 years nobody has ever asked me for anything, he said finally. Then somebody did, and the man who asked was the man who sang that song. Then he turned to Ozzy. It was worth playing once. Ozzy looked at him for a long moment. I didn't write that song, you know, he said eventually. Tony found the melody one afternoon sitting at a piano. Geezer wrote the words. All I did was sing it. Miles nodded. For 46 years people have remembered that song in your voice, he said. I'd say that counts as writing it too. Ozzy didn't answer because he had no answer to give. For 50 years a lot of people had used his name to open a door, to get a table, to get a photograph. But that night, this kid had done the exact opposite. He had lost his own job by not saying it. In 69 years, there had been nothing like it. You're coming back inside with me, Ozzy said. The revolving door turned one more time, and the warm, lily-scented air of the lobby took them both in. Ozzy took 2 steps, stopped, and deliberately did the thing he had spent 50 years avoiding. He pushed his hood back and slid his round glasses up onto his forehead. The woman at the end of the bar, the one who had set her glass down on the table while the song was playing, looked at him first, then at the phone in her hand, then at him again. Her voice carried to everyone in the silence of the lobby. Oh my God, that's Ozzy Osbourne. The name spread through the lobby like a wave. 1 phone came up, then 3, then 10. Chairs scraped back. 2 tables stood up at the same time. People lined the mezzanine railing. Julian Reeve was standing next to the front desk, and as every bit of color drained out of his face, one sentence kept turning over in his head. Black Sabbath is not played in this hotel's lobby. He was only now understanding who he had said it to. Ozzy didn't look at the crowd or at the phones. He walked straight to Reeve and stopped beside the piano. I asked for the song, he said. His voice was low, but everyone in the lobby heard it. That kid lied to you, and he did it for me. Now you've heard the truth. Reeve's lips parted, but no sound came out. Let me ask you something, Ozzy went on. Did you listen to that song, or did you just hear its name? Reeve couldn't answer because they both already knew the answer. Ozzy put his hand on the lid of the piano. I grew up in Aston, he said. Birmingham, the factory side of it. I got thrown out of school at 15. I worked in a slaughterhouse. I tested car horns in a factory. Then we started a band, and we called it Black Sabbath. He paused for a moment. For 50 years after that, people heard the name first. I'd walk into a shop, and they'd hit the alarm. Not one of them had ever listened to the song. And the thing you threw out of your lobby tonight is an elegy about loss, played on a piano. There isn't a single shout in it, but its name is Black Sabbath. Reeve's eyes slid to the mezzanine for a second, to the notebook, and Ozzy caught the look. It's because of that man, isn't it? He said. Reeve said nothing for a long time, and then, for the first time in his life, he told a guest the truth. The hotel changed hands 9 months ago. I have 2 children. I don't know what he's writing in that notebook. Ozzy nodded. He wasn't angry. He was tired. I'm not angry with you, he said. I've got no right to be. While you were firing that kid, I was sitting 15 yards away and I didn't say a word. You did it because you were afraid. I didn't do anything because I didn't want to be bothered. We both had an excuse, and neither of us paid for it. Then his voice came up a little. I came back in here to pay my share. What you do about yours is up to you." Reeve turned to Miles, and it took him a few seconds to put his words together. "What I did tonight was wrong," he said. "Your job is still yours. I'll see you here tomorrow evening at 7:30. Somebody in the lobby clapped, and then everybody did. 40 people on their feet, applauding a pianist getting his job back. Miles lowered his head, and the story could have ended right there, in a good place. But Ozzy hadn't moved away from the piano. "There's one more thing," he said, and the applause stopped. He turned to Miles. "Tonight, in the middle of one of those pieces, you played 4 bars," he said. "In between 2 sections, quiet enough that nobody would catch it. That isn't on the list. Whose is it?" Miles' face went red. "Mine," he said. "Where do you play it?" Ozzy asked. "After the lobby empties out," Miles said. "After midnight, when there's nobody here." Ozzy pointed at the piano stool. "Sit down," he said. "Play it now." Miles looked at the crowd first, then at Reeve. Reeve hesitated for a second, and in that second, 20 years of habit collided with what he had learned that evening. Then he picked up the laminated list from the piano, turned it face down on the counter, and said, "Play." Miles sat. His hands hung above the keys for a moment, then came down. What he played had no name. It wasn't on any list. It wasn't on any album. It had grown over 4 years in an empty lobby, after midnight, in a place where nobody could hear it. It was a simple thing, heavy and thoughtful. It rose in the middle and then came quietly back down. Up on the mezzanine, the auditor closed his notebook, leaned against the railing, and never wrote another word that night. When the piece ended, Miles didn't lift his hands. He thought for a moment, then touched the keys once more, and this time a familiar melody began. The melody that had been found on an afternoon in Bel Air 46 years earlier. Ozzy leaned against the curve of the piano. There was no microphone, no speaker, no stage light. Then he started to sing, and the voice that filled that marble lobby was technically flawed. It was rough. It was tired. It shook in places. But there were 50 years inside it. The back streets of Aston, Randy Rhoads' plane going down, Sharon's hospital rooms, and 1,000 nights with a piece of him left behind in every one of them. Before he left, Ozzy picked up the list, lying face down on the counter, and wrote 2 sentences. On the back of it, on the blank side of 214 songs. Then he handed the sheet not to Miles, but to Julian Reeve. "Hang this next to the piano," he said. Reeve read it, and his hands shook slightly while he did. The auditor's report reached the hotel group 3 weeks later, and it contained exactly 1 sentence about that night. Something happened in this hotel's lobby that cannot be measured. That sentence saved Reeve's job. On July 22, 2025, when Ozzy Osbourne passed away, Miles Carter was 33 years old and he was working at the Ellsworth that night. After his shift ended, the lobby emptied, the chandelier dimmed, and the lilies were where they always were. At 3 in the morning, he opened the lid and played that song, with no microphone, no lights, and no audience. Julian Reeve stood at the end of the corridor with his hands in his pockets and said nothing. This time, nobody stopped him. The little frame beside the piano was hard to make out in the dark, but Miles knew the 2 sentences inside it by heart. The name of a song is not the song, and neither is the name of a man. The signature underneath had been in the same place for 7 years, and the man who signed it hadn't written the name the whole world knew. He had written the name he was given when he was born in Aston, John.